Welcome back everyone. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Great Repression, the story of sedition in India by Chitranshul Sinha. This book is the story of the evolution of the offence of sedition in India. This offence was introduced by British in the Indian Penal Code in 1870, and today it is 151 years old and it has evolved. First it was introduced by the British, and then there was debate in the Constituent Assembly if we wish to retain it or not. Ultimately it was retained. The debate was because so many of the nationalist leaders, including Tilak, Gandhi, Nehru, and a lot more of these tall leaders, were detained and imprisoned under this offence. And the author of this book is Mr. Chitranshul Sinha. He is an advocate on record in the Supreme Court of India and also a partner in Dua Associates, advocates and solicitors, and he practices generally in New Delhi. Now coming to the book, as I told you that this offence is almost 150 years old now. This offence was included in the Indian Penal Code in 1837 itself, but it was included in the draft of IPC, but it was not given effect to, and the clause was not retained in the final draft of IPC. But then it was given effect in 1870 because there were so many mass movements going on against the British, and the British wanted to have some control over the Indian citizens, Indian subjects, not citizens, so that they can have some control over them, and that's how they introduced this into the IPC. And in its early life there were 4 trials that are of importance. First of these trials is in the backdrop of Vernacular Press Act, and it was against a newspaper whose name was Bangobasi, and it literally means citizen of Bengal. What happened was that there was this law that the British brought, which was in a way good, that the consent of a girl is important when you have sex with her, and they fixed the age at just 10. If we think today, the age of just 10 years is very low, because we know that a child of 10 years of age knows nothing about sex, and there's no way the person can understand the repercussions of it and grant consent for it. But at that time there were many reactionaries who thought that Britishers want to interfere with Hindu civilization and Hinduism, and thus they opposed it. And while this movement of opposition to this whole consent law was going on, there was this newspaper translatedly called Citizen of Bengal, which attacked the government and the government of the day of the Britishers, and wrote some articles, and the government obviously didn't like these articles, and that's how the case of sedition was initiated against this newspaper. And the case was before Calcutta High Court, and the name of the case was called Queen Empress versus Jogendra Chandra Bose and others. And Justice Pitharam was presiding over this hearing, and he defined disaffection in the that is given in the offence of sedition. The offence of sedition is that if you promote disaffection or disapprobation against the government of the day, then it is sedition. And there are some exceptions, like that if you do a critique of the policies of the government with good intentions so that they can be improved, then it is not sedition. So here Justice Pitharam defined disaffection, which is given in the ingredients of sedition, as mere absence of affection for the government. So it was like very broad. So if I say that I don't like you, doesn't mean that I hate you. But here the judge who was presiding the trial said that if you don't love the government, it simply means that you're seditious and you hate the government. And the second trial, which is of importance, is of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, which is the first trial of Bal Gangadhar Tilak. The second trial of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, which happened some decades later, is very famous, and we'll be talking about that as well. Uh, Mr. Tilak, who was a freedom fighter, published a newspaper called Kesari. He wrote many articles in that about some policies of the government, and there was this particular policy which was about the plague that hit India. And under this policy, the the officers of the British could visit homes and investigate as to uh, hygiene is being observed and things like that. Means they could barge into the houses of the Indians and inspect. Now Tilak was not happy about it, because he thought that that women live in Indian houses, and how can we allow male British officers to visit these houses, because it is against Indian ethos. So he wrote some articles against this policy of the government, and to be fair, these articles were a little you know these were quite passionate articles. And he and after this, what happened, that there was this British officer called Mr. Rand, and he was assassinated. And after he was assassinated, he was Mr. Tilak was charged with sedition, because by saying that some of his articles had incited people to violence, and thus had caused the assassination of Mr. Rand. He was represented in the court by Sir Dinshaw Davar. Now, this Sir Dinshaw Davar is the advocate now, but in the second trial, he will be the judge who will be presiding over the trial. Um, in the first trial, Justice Stretchy was presiding over the trial, and there were 9 jury members. Out of these 9 jury members, 6 were Europeans and 3 were Indians. Now, the intention behind the publication of such articles was also to be taken into consideration. As per Justice Stretchy, this is what he explained to the jury members. He told them that when you read these articles that are written by Mr. Tilak, you have to take into consideration that did he really wanted to incite the people of the country against the British officers, against the British government, or was it a criticism of the policies of the government, of the Plague Committee, in good faith? Because in a way he was critiquing the policies of the government as well. Now it was to be decided by the jury if he also wanted to incite people and to commit violence against the committee, against the policies of the government. Now, according to Justice Stretchy, also that disaffection meant the absence of affection, which was held in the first case as well. Now, according to this jury, Tilak was convicted. All the 6 Europeans who were on the jury convicted him and found him guilty, and the 3 jurors who were Indians found him non guilty, and he was sentenced to 18 months of rigorous imprisonment in the jail. He appealed to the Privy Council, and he appealed basically on this point of definition of disaffection. He asked the Privy Council to define what exactly is disaffection, and he was represented by a Queen's Council in that, and this Queen's Council later became the Prime Minister of England from 1908 to 1916. His name was H. Asquith, and he argued before the Privy Council that what he had written in these newspaper articles did not exceed the bounds of public journalism that is found in England itself, and this definition of disaffection would also affect lots of other Indian subjects who were living in the Indian colony. So he asked the Privy Council to reconsider this definition, that disaffection means mere absence of affection, which was quite broad. But the Privy Council did not agree with the council, and dismissed all the petitions, and said that it is not a fit case for the grant of leave, and dismissed all these petitions on 19th of November in 1897. Now the third and fourth cases you can read it yourself. Now let's talk about the very famous trial of Tilak in the sedition case, which was the second trial. In this case, he was charged under sedition, which is under 124A section of IPC, and also charged under 153A of IPC, which is about promoting enmity between two communities. Now, as I told you, now the lawyer of Mr. Tilak was the judge in the case. So now Justice Dinshaw Davar, who was his erstwhile lawyer in the first case, was the judge in the case. The lawyer who was arguing for the bail of Mr. Tilak was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was later called the father of Pakistan. And he passionately argued that in the first trial, Mr. Tilak was let out on bail, and this should be the case which should be repeated again, so that he can fight his case properly. But the judge did not agree, and he was not granted bail, and he fought this case when he was imprisoned. So the trial lawyer now was Joseph Baptista, and the jury had 9 members. Out of these 9, 7 were Europeans and 2 were Indians. Now the thing about Tilak is also this, that he wrote in Marathi in his newspaper called Kesari. So these articles were in Marathi, and he also complained of the fact of the, not a fact, but he believed that these articles that were translated from Marathi to English were not the correct translations. Now, because these 7 of the 9 jurors did not know Marathi because they were Europeans, he believed that the case could not be decided correctly by them. But the judge did not agree with him, and during the trial he said this quote, and let me quote this quote for you. "All I wish to say is that in spite of the verdict of the jury, I maintain that I am innocent. There are higher powers that rule the destinies of things, and it may well be the will of Providence that the cause which I represent may prosper more by my suffering than by my remaining free." He was held guilty. He was given the punishment for 3 years of transportation, and he was transported to Mandalay in Burma. There was another case of Ganesh Savarkar, who was brother of Savarkar, who was very famous, and he was transported for life to cellular jail in Andaman for the same reason. And then there was this Gandhi trial, which also got very famous. Gandhi was tried for sedition because he had launched a civil disobedience movement and non-cooperation movement, and he was arrested in Ahmedabad on 10th March 1922, and he was held guilty, and Gandhi had called sedition as the highest duty of the citizen. Then the next part of the book is divided into several parts. The third part of the book talks about sedition in the Republic, which essentially means that how sedition evolved once India became independent. When we were about to be independent, the Constituent Assembly debated at length as to should we retain sedition or not, because so many nationalist leaders like Nehru, Gandhi and Tilak had been to jail because they were convicted under this offence of sedition, and that's how there was this debate that was going on in the assembly. But these leaders, Nehru absolutely detested it, but it was still retained on the statute books, and also, but the thing is that there's this loophole in exceptions to Article 19. There was no mention of sedition. So because of this, Punjab and Haryana High Court in Tara Singh Gopichand case struck it down as unconstitutional, saying that because it is not an exception to freedom of speech and expression, so retaining this offence would create an hindrance to freedom of speech and expression, and thus we are striking it down. There were some other high courts also that that ruled on the constitutionality of sedition, and there were diverse views in these high courts. Patna High Court declared it as constitutional. Manipur High Court struck it down partially but retained it partially. Allahabad High Court declared it as unconstitutional fully. Now, because there were many high courts that had ruled in one side or the other, in the middle also, so the Supreme Court sat and decided its constitutionality in Kedarnath Singh case. The Supreme Court said that until your speech does not incite violence or does not intend to incite violence, it is not sedition. And the Supreme Court read it down partially in this way. Also, the author tries to bring our attention to the fact that this judgment came in 1962 when India and China were at war. So the court also would have this thing in the back of their mind while ruling this, that the country is not in a stable condition. So we cannot allow something that is detrimental to the integrity of India to go unchecked. So that is why they retained it partially. But the author believes that things are different today. The country is quite stable. Even if today somebody stands up and says that let us do an armed rebellion against the government that is established by law, it would not mean as a danger to the nation itself, because the country is quite stable, and just because one group wants to do something, it would not really affect the country. And also the author says that just because we argue that just because he argues that sedition should go, does not mean that if somebody tomorrow stands up and takes up arms against the government, would not mean that he goes unpunished. There are several other laws under which that person can be punished, because creating public disorder is an offence. Then there was this another case that came before the Supreme Court called Balwant Singh case. In this peculiar case, on the same day when the Indira Gandhi was assassinated, there were two gentlemen in Chandigarh who were also government employees who raised some slogans, Zindabad and Raj Karega Khalsa, and also something that would promote a disharmony between two communities, that is Sikhs and Hindus. The court said that mere raising of slogans is not sedition, and also the fact that there were only two people and nobody else who was on that street in Chandigarh raised slogans in support of what they were saying is reminiscent of the fact that just because someone believes in something does not make it seditious until a huge mass is incited to take recourse to violence to do that thing. And then the author also talks about many horror stories of invocation of sedition against journalists, intellectuals, authors, and also opposition leaders and things like that. He talks about many people, but I will be talking about only two. I'll be talking about Miss Arundhati Roy and also Mr. Arun Jaitley. Miss Arundhati Roy says, "My views on these matters are at variance with those of the ruling establishment. In better days, that used to be known as critical perspective or an alternative worldview. These days, it's called sedition." There was also this case of Mr. Arun Jaitley criticizing the judiciary for its judgment on NJAC, which struck down 99th Amendment, and in that he had called that the country cannot be a tyranny of the unelected and things like that. So a judge in UP who was in the district judiciary took note of it suo motu and initiated a case of sedition against him. The Allahabad High Court came to his rescue by saying that a judge cannot himself suo motu do it because there are restrictions under section 196 of CRPC. But the fact is that today you say something and next day, even on the same day, you will be charged under sedition for saying something that is not palatable to the establishment. It is being used as a way to quell dissent and also diverse views. and there are many judgments of the court, but once a case is registered, you are incarcerated, you are in jail, and once you are in jail, you are, you become vulnerable. uh, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud has said, and this is written in the opening of the book. He This quote is in the opening of the book. He had said, "The Constitution fails when a cartoonist is jailed for sedition." That is, a cartoonist, whatever kind of cartoon that person might make, political, uh, but they can't be seditious. He, where do we, where is our freedom of speech and expression when we can't say things that are uh, that are offensive to some, that are unpalatable to some, like establishment or some people who think of themselves as geniuses who can never be wrong? Because if we believe that we are the only people who are right, and our view and our opinion is the right opinion, and there's no other chance, then we are fools. Because once we hear both sides, it has happened with me as well, that once I hear the arguments on both sides, I change sides. So you can read this book to know about the full evolution of sedition in India, the offense of sedition in India. I have quoted some selected trials and selected cases because these were the most important ones. There are some others also given in the book. There are many other horror stories of how people are victimized and victimized. The book talks about how these people are not actually seditious, but the ones who disagree with the government, with the establishment politically, and then these people are incarcerated on false charges of you know uh, the government just wants to victimize you. That's it. And how the conviction rate is so low, it's negligible, it's 2%, 3%, and the cases registered every year are in hundreds. So please wake up to these facts and make up your mind, because the Supreme Court is also going to hear this case very soon. They are going to test the constitutionality of sedition under today's circumstances. So thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, please like it, share it, subscribe to my channel. I'll be back next Sunday with a new book review. Till then, take care, stay safe. Thank you very much for watching.